Step away from the vehicle. Keep your hands where I can see them. Officer Miller's voice was a whip crack in the quiet suburb. He and his partner, Officer Evans, approached the sleek Lexus with predatory confidence. Their sneers widened when they saw the driver, 16-year-old Elijah Vance, still in his basketball practice jersey. Elijah's hands went up, open and empty. "Officers, what's the problem? This is my mom's car." Evans' boot slammed into Elijah's gym bag, sending a physics textbook and a water bottle skittering across the pavement. Miller shoved the teenager hard against the warm hood, the metal groaning in protest. "You think we're stupid, kid?" Miller snarled, his face inches from Elijah's. "A piece of trash like you driving through a neighborhood like this? You stole this car." "I didn't. My mom—" Miller's laugh was a harsh, ugly sound. "Your mom? What's she gonna do? Your mom's a lawyer?" The sound that shattered the tranquil afternoon on Crestwood Lane was not a natural one. It was the aggressive, digital squawk of a police siren, a sound so alien to this particular stretch of manicured peace that it seemed to suck the very oxygen from the air. One moment, there was only the gentle rustle of autumn leaves in the towering oaks and the distant hum of a lawnmower. The next, the world was painted in strobing, violent shades of red and blue. Officer Miller's patrol car had come around the corner, not with a sense of purpose, but with a predatory lurch, tires barely squealing as if the vehicle itself was too contemptuous of the neighborhood's silence to make more than a necessary disturbance. It was a calculated arrival, designed for maximum theatrical impact. The car came to a halt at a diagonal, blocking the path of a sleek silver Lexus that was still purring softly, its driver's side door open. Elijah Vance had one foot on the pavement, his worn basketball gym bag slung over his shoulder. He was frozen in mid-motion, a 16-year-old boy caught in the terrifying transition between one ordinary moment and the next. His heart, which had been beating a steady post-practice rhythm, suddenly felt like a trapped bird slamming against his ribs. The Westwood High basketball jersey he wore, emblazoned with his number 24, felt suddenly thin and insignificant against the assault of the flashing lights. Officer Miller exploded from his vehicle. He didn't open the door so much as he used it as a weapon, swinging it out with a force that made the hinges groan. He was a large man, not with fat, but with a dense, solid bulk that seemed to absorb the light around him. His tactical boots crunched with deliberate heaviness on the imported Belgian block pavement of the Vance family driveway. His partner, Officer Evans, emerged more slowly, his face a mask of weary resignation. He hung back by the hood of the patrol car, a silent witness to a scene he had seen variations of before. "Step away from the vehicle. Keep your hands where I can see them." Miller's voice was a blunt instrument, devoid of professional inquiry, dripping with a contempt that was personal and immediate. Elijah's hands went up, his palms open and empty. Years of his mother's calm, legal-minded coaching surfaced through the initial surge of fear. Be calm, be clear, be respectful. Do not give them a reason. "Officers, what's the problem? This is my mom's car." His voice was steady, a miracle considering the adrenaline screaming through his veins. Miller was already circling him, his eyes scanning the Lexus, not for evidence, but for imperfections, for a reason. "The problem," Miller sneered, "is that a car matching this description was reported stolen from this very neighborhood not an hour ago. The problem is, I see you, and I don't see a matching description for anyone who'd be legally driving it." Elijah's mind raced. A stolen car. From Crestwood. It was ludicrous. Every car on this street was worth more than a police officer's annual salary, each one guarded by a fortress of alarm systems and neighborhood watch apps. "Sir, that's impossible. I just got back from basketball practice. I live here, 2412 Crestwood Lane. This is our driveway." Evans shifted his weight, his gaze flicking from Elijah's earnest, frightened face to the sprawling, modern minimalist mansion behind him. "Miller, maybe we should just—" "Shut it, Evans," Miller snapped without looking at his partner. His focus was entirely on Elijah, a predator who had cornered his prey and was in no mood to be interrupted. "You live here." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of pure, unadulterated disbelief. "In this house, you expect me to believe that?" He moved with a sudden, shocking speed. His boot, heavy and reinforced, lashed out and slammed into the gym bag dangling from Elijah's shoulder. The bag wasn't zipped all the way. The impact was vicious, a release of pent-up aggression. The bag flew from Elijah's grasp, its contents exploding across the pristine driveway like the innards of a shattered piñata. A physics textbook skidded across the stone, its cover scraping. A water bottle bounced and rolled under the Lexus. A protein bar, a set of house keys, and a small framed photograph of Elijah with his mother at a college tour landed in a scattered, pathetic cluster. Before Elijah could even process the violation, Miller was on him. A meaty hand, hard as seasoned oak, clamped onto the front of his jersey and shoved him back with brutal force. Elijah's back slammed into the driver's side door of the Lexus. The metallic thum reverberated through the quiet street, a sound of violation that seemed to silence the birds in the trees. The pain was sharp and radiating, a bloom of agony between his shoulder blades. "You think we're stupid, kid?" Miller snarled, his face so close that Elijah could smell the stale coffee on his breath, see the broken capillaries mapping his nose. "You think we just fell off the turnip truck? A piece of trash like you driving through a neighborhood like this? You stole this car, admit it." The fear was now a living thing coiling in Elijah's gut, but beneath it a spark of indignation flickered. This was his home. This was his mother's car. He had done nothing wrong. "I didn't. I told you, this is my mum's." Miller's laugh cut him off. It was a harsh, ugly sound, devoid of any genuine humor. It was the sound of power being exercised for its own sake. "Your mum? What's she gonna do, huh? She gonna come out here and bake us some cookies? Your mum's a lawyer?" He infused the word lawyer with as much sarcasm as it could hold. Elijah, his breath coming in short gasps from the pressure on his chest, looked the officer dead in the eye. The spark of indignation caught. He straightened his spine as much as he could against the unyielding metal of the car. His voice, when it came, was low but clear, carrying a dignity that the situation had not yet stolen from him. "Actually, sir, she's a judge." The effect was instantaneous and electric. Both officers froze. For a single suspended second, the only sounds were the idle purr of the Lexus and the relentless crackle of the police radio. Miller's grip on Elijah's jersey loosened a fraction. His eyes, which had been narrowed slits of suspicion, widened just a hair. It was a crack in the armor of his certainty. Then, the moment shattered. Miller recovered, his confusion melting into a fresh, more volatile wave of rage. He released Elijah and took a half-step back, then burst into loud, theatrical laughter. It was a forced, performative sound, meant for an audience. Evans, catching his partner's cue, let out a weaker, more uncertain chuckle. "A judge," Miller wheezed, slapping his thigh for emphasis. He turned to Evans, playing to his partner as his sole audience member. "You hear that, Evans? His mommy's a judge. He lives in a $2 million home and his mommy sits on the bench." He turned his mocking gaze back to Elijah, his laughter dying into a cruel smirk. "What's next, kid? Your dad's the police chief? Your grandma's the president?" The humiliation was a physical heat washing over Elijah. He could feel the eyes from the surrounding houses. The Johnsons across the street were now on their porch, their phones held up. Old Mr. Gable had stopped watering his prize-winning hydrangeas and was staring, his mouth a small round O of shock. The entire community, the place where he'd grown up, where he'd trick-or-treated and sold Boy Scout popcorn, was witnessing his public shaming. Miller, emboldened by the growing audience, decided to escalate. He reached down and picked up the framed photograph from the driveway. It was a simple picture. Elijah and his mother, Judge Anita Vance, standing in front of Stanford University's Hoover Tower. Both were smiling, her arm around his shoulders. Miller held it up, sneering at it. "See this, Evans, the judge and her son on a field trip." He made a show of studying it. "Must be nice. Must be real nice to have a mommy who's a judge to get you out of trouble." He tossed the photograph back onto the ground. The glass in the frame cracked with a sickening finality. "Please," Elijah said, his composure beginning to fracture under the weight of the mockery and the destruction of his property. "If you just let me call her, she can clear this all up." "Call her?" Miller's voice rose to a falsetto of mock delight. "You want to call your imaginary judge mommy? "Oh, this is rich. Go ahead, kid. Put her on speakerphone. I could use a good laugh." He gestured broadly to the neighbors who were now gathering at a safe distance, their faces a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity. "Ladies and gentlemen, the criminal wants to call his judge Mommy. Let's all hear what the honorable make-believe magistrate has to say for her car-thieving son." He was playing to the crowd, a circus ringmaster of his own corruption. He fed off their stunned silence, mistaking it for approval. He was no longer just investigating a crime. He was performing a ritual of dominance, a public reminder of who held the real power on these pristine streets. It was at that moment, as Miller's cruel laughter echoed against the clean lines of the Vance residence, that a new sound insinuated itself into the chaos. It was not a siren. It was not a shout. It was the smooth, deep, and unmistakably expensive purr of a high-performance engine. A black BMW 7 Series, sleek and imposing as a shark, glided to a silent halt directly behind the patrol car. Its obsidian paint gleamed under the late afternoon sun, flawless and deep. The license plate was simple, stark, and devoid of vanity. Judge 4. The driver's door opened with a hushed, mechanical whisper. A black judicial pump, elegant and severe, touched the asphalt of Crestwood Lane, and a voice calm as a gavel's fall, yet sharp enough to slice through the thick atmosphere of arrogance and fear, said, "Yes, I am." The two words landed not like a shout, but like a verdict. They carried a weight of absolute, unassailable authority. Officer Miller's laughter died in his throat, strangled into a choked gurgle. He and Evans spun around as if pulled by a single string. The color drained from Miller's face so completely, he looked like a negative of himself. His jaw went slack. The swagger, the contempt, the performative rage, it all evaporated, leaving behind only the hollow shell of a man who had just realized with stomach-lurching certainty that he had made a catastrophic, career-ending error in judgment. Standing there immaculate in a tailored black suit, her posture radiating an authority that their badges and weapons could never hope to match, was the Honorable Anita Vance of the State Appeals Court. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to brandish a weapon. Her presence alone was a force of nature. Her eyes, intelligent and fierce, swept over the scene with a prosecutor's precision, her son pinned against the car, his face a mask of humiliation and relief, his belongings scattered across the driveway like garbage, the cracked photograph of the two of them, the two police officers, one now looking like a terrified child caught stealing, the other looking like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. "I am Judge Vance," she continued, her voice still calm, but each word a shard of ice. "And that young man you have cornered against my vehicle is my son, Elijah." She took a step forward, her heels clicking decisively on the pavement. The sound was the ticking of a clock counting down the final seconds of their careers. "Now, officers," she said, her gaze locking onto Miller's petrified one. "Would you like to see his registration and proof of insurance, which are in the glove box of my car? Or would you prefer to explain your probable cause for this detention and your use of force against a minor to me, right here, right now?" The world on Crestwood Lane had stopped. The only movement was the slow, horrified lowering of phones as the neighbors realized the scale of what was unfolding. The hunter had become the hunted. The mockery had been answered with the cold, hard truth. And the question, "Your mom's a judge?" had just received the most devastating answer imaginable. To understand the seismic shock of that moment in the driveway, the absolute inversion of power that left Officers Miller and Evans as hollowed-out statues of regret, one must rewind the tape of the day. One must leave the strobing lights and the shattered dignity and step back into the quiet, ordered world of the Vance household, a world built not on privilege alone, but on discipline, intellect, and a deep, abiding belief in the rule of law. The confrontation was an earthquake, but the life that had been built before it was a testament to everything that earthquakes sought to destroy. 4 hours earlier, the first light of dawn had not yet breached the horizon. The Vance residence at 2412 Crestwood Lane was a study in silent, modern elegance. Its clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and muted color palette were a world away from the ornate, old-money grandeur of some neighboring homes. Here the wealth was expressed in space, in light, in art. Inside, the only sound was the soft, insistent buzz of Elijah Vance's alarm clock. 5:30 a.m. Elijah's hand emerged from under his duvet and silenced it with a practiced tap. There was no groaning, no hitting the snooze button. This was a ritual, as ingrained in him as breathing. His room was a reflection of a mind that valued both passion and order. On one wall, a large poster of Thurgood Marshall looked out with quiet determination. On another, shelves held a cluster of basketball trophies, their golden figures frozen in mid-dribble or jump shot. But beside them, just as prominent, were the science fair ribbons and the debate team medals. A well-worn basketball sat in a corner, next to a stack of books whose titles included Gideon's Trumpet, The Nine, and Simple Justice. He swung his legs out of bed and padded across the cool hardwood floor to his desk. Neatly stacked were his flashcards for his Advanced Placement U.S. Government class. The top card read, Map v. Ohio, 1961, incorporation of the exclusionary rule to the states via the 14th Amendment Due Process Clause. He reviewed it, his lips moving silently. This was his quiet time, the hour he owned before the world demanded anything of him. Downstairs the house was still and dark. He moved through the open-plan living area, his movements sure and silent. He filled the kettle and set it to boil, then measured out oats into a bowl. The routine was meditative. As the water heated, he stood before the large framed photograph that dominated the main wall. It was a professional portrait of his mother, Judge Anita Vance, in her judicial robes. She wasn't smiling in the picture. Her expression was one of profound and sober intelligence. Her eyes seemed to follow you around the room, a constant, gentle reminder of the standard to which they both were held. On the granite countertop beneath it was a note, written in her precise, looping script. Elijah, knocked 'em dead at the oral arguments yesterday. Go be brilliant today. Knock 'em dead at practice tonight. Love, Mum. P.S. The car is yours. Be safe. The Lexus. It wasn't a gift of frivolous indulgence. It was a tool, a symbol of trust earned through relentless responsibility. It was for getting himself to and from school, practice, and his volunteer work at the local legal aid clinic without having to rely on his mother's grueling, unpredictable schedule. It was a testament to her belief in him, a belief he carried with him like a shield. By 6:45 a.m., he was on the road, the morning sun now casting long, golden shadows through the canopy of trees on Crestwood Lane. The Lexus was silent. He never played music in the morning. Instead, he listened to a podcast, a recording of Supreme Court oral arguments. Today, it was Miranda versus Arizona. He drove, his hands at 10 and 2, his mind dissecting the legal reasoning, anticipating the justice's questions. He wasn't just a kid driving to school. He was a legal scholar in training, honing his craft. Westwood High School was a sprawling, modern campus, but Elijah moved through its hallways with a quiet confidence that drew eyes without him seeking them. In the classroom, he was a force. His history teacher, Mr. Abrams, often found himself playing devil's advocate just to spark a debate with him. Mr. Vance, Abrams would say, a smile playing on his lips, explained to the class why the civil rights cases of 1883 were a catastrophic failure of the court's duty. And Elijah would stand, not with arrogance, but with the calm assurance of someone who had done the reading, who had understood it, and who had formed his own conclusions. Because, sir, the court fundamentally misinterpreted the 14th Amendment, he would begin, his voice clear and carrying. By ruling that the Civil Rights Act of 1875 couldn't regulate the conduct of private individuals, only state actors, they opened the door for Jim Crow. They created a legal fiction that segregation was a private matter, not a state-sanctioned system of oppression. It was a betrayal of Reconstruction's promise. The class would be silent, some bored, but many captivated. He had a gift for making the dense, dry text of legal history feel urgent and alive. After class, a huddle of younger students often surrounded him. Elijah, can you break down the levels of scrutiny again? Strict, intermediate, rational basis. Hey man, what did you think of the Dobbs decision leak? He was patient, a natural teacher. He understood that the law was not a secret language for the initiated, but the operating system of their society, and everyone had a right and a need to understand it. Meanwhile, across town in a precinct house that smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner, Officer Brad Miller was beginning his shift. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly greenish glow on the scuffed linoleum floor. Miller slammed his locker shut, the sound a sharp report in the cramped room. His reflection in the small steel mirror showed a man perpetually dissatisfied. 16 years on the force had not given him wisdom or perspective. It had only salted a deep, festering wound of resentment. His partner, Ben Evans, a younger man with 5 years in, watched him warily. "Rough night?" Evans ventured. "Every night's rough when you're fighting a war nobody else wants to admit we're in," Miller grumbled, checking his sidearm with mechanical efficiency. "You see the stats from the north side? Gangs are running wild, and where are we? We're babysitting rich folks in Crestwood and writing tickets for expired registrations." His patrol route was a personal purgatory. He deliberately cruised through neighborhoods like Crestwood, not to protect and serve, but to stew. Each manicured lawn, each BMW and Mercedes, each house that was larger than his entire apartment building was a personal affront. He saw not hard work and success, but unearned privilege. He saw a world that had been gate-kept from him, and his bitterness was the key he carried, though it opened no doors, only hardened his heart. His radio crackled with the real work of the city, a burglary in progress downtown, a domestic dispute in the projects, a shoplifting call at a corner store. He ignored them. They weren't the calls that fed the hunger in him. He wasn't hunting for crime. He was hunting for a target. He was searching for someone upon whom he could visit the cosmic injustice he felt had been visited upon him. At 3:30 p.m., in a courtroom downtown, Judge Anita Vance brought her gavel down with a definitive crack. "This court is adjourned." The sound echoed in the paneled silence. She rose, her black robes flowing around her, and retreated to her chambers. The case had been a complex civil dispute, a contract law matter that had required her to parse pages of dense legalese. It was intellectually stimulating, but it was not why she did this job. Her chambers were a sanctuary of law and love. One wall was floor-to-ceiling books, leather-bound reporters filled with the accumulated wisdom and folly of centuries of jurisprudence. The other wall was dedicated to her son, photos of Elijah at every stage, a gap-toothed 7-year-old holding a basketball almost as big as he was, a 13-year-old accepting a debate trophy, a recent, more serious portrait from this year, the man he was becoming clear in his eyes. Every judgment she wrote, every ruling she made, was filtered through a single powerful question. What kind of world am I shaping for him? What precedent am I setting? The drive home was her decompression time. She let the quiet of the Mercedes cabin settle around her. She thought about the Dobbs decision, about the seismic shift in constitutional law, and she knew Elijah would want to discuss it over dinner. Their nightly meals were often intellectual sparring sessions, debates on everything from originalism versus a living constitution to the merits of zone defense versus man-to-man. She cherished them. They were the bedrock of their relationship. At 4:15 p.m., Elijah's final bell rang. Basketball practice was a release, a different kind of discipline. On the court, he was all motion and instinct, the cerebral young lawyer replaced by a fierce physical competitor. He drove the lane, his mind clear of everything but the basket, the ball, the positioning of his teammates and opponents. It was a purer, simpler world than the one of legal precedents, and he loved it for its clarity. Practice ended at 5:30 p.m. with a win in a scrimmage. He was sweaty, tired, and exhilarated. He showered, changed back into his street clothes, and slung his gym bag over his shoulder. "See you tomorrow, Vance," his teammates called. "Don't stay up all night reading the Constitution." He grinned. "It's a real page-turner. The suspense is killing me." He climbed into the Lexus, the leather seats cool against his back. This time he did turn on the radio. But it wasn't hip-hop or pop. It was a spoken-word poet, the rhythmic, powerful words filling the space, talking about justice and legacy. He pulled out of the school parking lot and began the familiar 15-minute journey home. He mentally rehearsed the points he wanted to make to his mother, about the Dobbs descent. He was so focused, so ensconced in the safe, predictable bubble of his life, that he was utterly unprepared for it to be punctured. At 5:45 p.m., 3 lives, traveling on their separate parallel tracks, were about to be violently wrenched into a catastrophic collision. Elijah turned onto Crestwood Lane, thinking of dinner and debate. Judge Vance was 6 minutes away, stopped at a red light, mentally reviewing her son's likely arguments. Officer Miller was 2 blocks over, his predatory instincts bored and restless, his eyes automatically scanning for anything, anyone, who didn't belong. He saw the silver Lexus first, an expensive car. Then he saw the driver, a young black face, a basketball jersey, and Crestwood. It was a recipe his prejudice had already written. He didn't see a boy coming home from practice. He saw a suspect. He saw a target. He saw an opportunity to feel the power that his own life so sorely lacked. "Dispatch, show me out with a suspicious vehicle on Crestwood Lane," he said into his radio, his voice dripping with anticipatory satisfaction. "Possible stolen vehicle. I'm going to investigate." Evans in the passenger seat sighed softly. "Miller, it's just a kid. He's probably a delivery driver or something." "Watch and learn, Evans," Miller said, a slow, ugly smile spreading across his face. "Watch and learn." He flipped the switch. The world exploded in red and blue. The siren whooped once, a sound of violent intent. The peaceful afternoon was shattered. The stage was set. The calm was over. The storm had arrived. The world on Crestwood Lane had become a tableau of stunned silence, broken only by the idle ticking of the Lexus's engine as it cooled. Judge Anita Vance's "Yes, I am" hung in the air, not as words, but as a fundamental restructuring of reality. Officer Miller looked less like a man and more like a statue of one, carved from pure fear. His hand, which had moments before been a weapon gripping Elijah's jersey, fell away, as if the fabric had become white-hot. Officer Evans simply took off his hat, a gesture of surrender and respect, his head bowed as if in prayer or profound shame. Judge Vance's eyes held Miller's for a second longer, long enough for him to see the cold fire of a mother's fury, tempered by the icy discipline of the bench. Then her gaze swept past him, landing on her son. "Elijah," she said, her voice softening by a single, crucial degree. "Are you hurt?" Elijah, pushing himself away from the car, straightened his torn jersey. The physical pain from the slam into the door was already a dull ache, but the psychological wound was raw and bleeding. Yet seeing his mother, seeing the instantaneous vaporization of the officer's authority, gave him a strength he didn't know he possessed. He stood to his full height. "I'm okay, Mom." His voice was thick with emotion, but it didn't crack. "I tried to tell them." "I know you did, baby," she said, the endearment a stark contrast to the professional chill of moments before. "I know." She then turned her attention back to the officers, and the temperature in the driveway dropped again. She didn't yell, she didn't need to. Her voice was a calibrated instrument of justice, and she used it with devastating precision. "Officer Miller," she began, and the use of his name made him flinch. "You have detained a minor without a shred of probable cause. You have used physical force against him, resulting in what will likely be documented bruising and ruin Zuji Sun Shang. You have destroyed his personal property." Her eyes flicked to the cracked photograph on the ground. "And you have engaged in a public spectacle of mockery and humiliation based on what appears to be your own deeply held racial biases." She paused, letting each charge land like a separate count in an indictment. "You asked him if his mother was a judge as a punchline. I am now answering you. It is not a joke. It is a fact. And it is a fact that will have profound consequences for you." Miller tried to speak. His mouth opened, but only a dry, rasping sound emerged. "Your Honor, we had a report." "Save it for internal affairs, officer," she cut him off, her tone final. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Her movements were not frantic, but deliberate, each tap on the screen a measured action. She dialed a number from memory. The sound of the ringing phone, amplified slightly in the quiet, was unbearably loud. Everyone watched, mesmerized. It rang twice before being answered. "Chief Daniels," Judge Vance said, her voice projecting just enough for the officers to hear. "This is Judge Anita Vance." A pause. "Yes, I'm fine, but I am at my home address, and I have a situation. Two of your officers, Officers Miller and Evans, are here. They have just assaulted my son, Elijah, in our driveway. Yes, assaulted. He is a minor. They falsely imprisoned him, destroyed his property, and I have witnessed what I believe to be a clear case of racial profiling and a grotesque abuse of power." She listened for a moment, her eyes never leaving Miller's pale, sweating face. "No, Chief. I do not want this handled quietly. I want them disarmed and detained immediately. I will be pressing every charge available to me: assault, battery, false imprisonment, violation of his civil rights under color of law. I expect you to be here within 10 minutes, and I expect you to bring internal affairs." She hung up. The finality of the click was more terrifying than any shout could have been. The word "detained" seemed to suck the last of the air from Miller's lungs. He staggered, his knees actually buckling for a moment, before he caught himself on the hood of the patrol car. The reality of his situation was a physical blow. His career was over. Not just on administrative leave, over, finished. The pension he'd been counting on, the identity he'd built over 16 years, evaporated in the time it took to make a phone call. Evans, to his credit, didn't try to argue. He slowly, carefully unbuckled his duty belt and placed it on the ground. Then he removed his sidearm, holding it by the barrel, and placed it on top of the belt. It was a gesture of total surrender. The neighbors, who had been recording everything, were now whispering among themselves. The narrative had flipped completely. This was no longer a story about a potential car thief. It was a story about corruption meeting its match. The hashtag #JYesYam was already being typed into captions as videos were uploaded. Within minutes, more official vehicles arrived. Not just Captain Daniels' car, but two unmarked sedans carrying the stern-faced men and women of internal affairs. The scene became a flurry of professional activity that entirely bypassed Miller and Evans. Captain Daniels, a man with a weary, competent face, went directly to Judge Vance, his expression one of profound apology. "Your Honor, on behalf of the entire department, I am so deeply sorry. There are no words." "Your words are not what I require, Captain," Judge Vance replied coolly. "Your actions are. I want a full, transparent investigation. I want their body camera footage seized immediately. I want every complaint ever filed against Officer Miller pulled and reviewed. This was not an isolated incident. This was a pattern waiting for its moment." As she spoke, an IA investigator approached Miller. The man held up a pair of handcuffs. The steel gleamed in the afternoon sun. "Officer Bradley Miller," the investigator said, his voice flat and professional, "you are under arrest for assault, battery, false imprisonment, and deprivation of rights under color of law. You have the right to remain silent." The Miranda warning, a recitation Miller had delivered hundreds of times, now sounded like his own funeral dirge. As the cuffs were clicked around his wrists, the same wrists that had, minutes before, been adorned with the badge of authority, he finally broke. A single choked sob escaped him. He was led to the back of an unmarked car, a fallen giant, his head bowed in irreversible shame. The fallout was swift and merciless, extending far beyond that driveway. The video evidence was incontrovertible. Miller was terminated within 48 hours and faced a litany of criminal charges. Evans, who had been complicit through his inaction, was suspended for 6 months without pay and required to undergo extensive retraining before being assigned to a desk job, his path to promotion permanently closed. But the story didn't end with their punishment. It became a catalyst. The public outcry was immediate. The city council, under pressure, established a new civilian oversight board with real power to investigate police misconduct. It was named the Vance Protocol in honor of Elijah. The police department, under Chief Daniels' reformed leadership, instituted mandatory intensive racial bias and de-escalation training for all officers. The old guard, those who shared Miller's toxic mindset, were quietly encouraged to retire or were pushed out. For Elijah, the trauma was real, but he refused to be defined by it. He channeled the experience into his college application essay. He wrote not with bitterness, but with a powerful clarity about the chasm between the law as it is written and the law as it is applied. He wrote about the Fourth Amendment not as an abstract concept, but as a shield that had failed him and his determination.